"Get out of my pub." For many viewers in Britain, that was not merely a line from EastEnders. It was Barbara Windsor entering the room before she had even appeared on screen. Small in height, sharp in voice, and utterly impossible to ignore, Peggy Mitchell could make the Queen Vic feel like the centre of the country. One raised eyebrow, one barked order, and half the nation knew exactly who was in charge. Yet the cruelest turn in Barbara Windsor's story is that the woman who became part of Britain's memory would one day begin losing her own. On 10 December 2020, Barbara died in a London care home, aged 83, with her husband Scott Mitchell by her side. She had lived for years with Alzheimer's disease, a condition first diagnosed in 2014 and made public in 2018. By then, the public knew the broad outline, the carry-on girl, the East End survivor, the BBC legend, the national treasure, as Britain rather likes to call people once it has finally decided to forgive them for being too popular. But those labels were never enough. Barbara Windsor had been laughed at, adored, underestimated, reinvented, and remembered by millions. She had spent decades giving people moments they could quote in kitchens, pubs, sitting rooms, and care homes. Then, in the final chapter, memory itself became the enemy. That is why her life cannot be told as a simple rise to fame. It is stranger, warmer, and more painful than that. It is the story of a girl from East London who chose a name fit for royalty, became a symbol of cheeky British comedy, escaped the shadow of it, and returned as one of television's most formidable matriarchs. The question is not only how Barbara Windsor became famous. The deeper question is this: when a performer has given a country so many memories, who keeps those memories safe when she no longer can? To understand why Britain cared about Barbara Windsor, you have to understand what she represented. She was never simply a famous actress with a bright smile and a gift for timing. She belonged to that peculiar category of British performer who somehow seemed to have wandered out of real life and onto the screen, without losing the smell of the street, the pub, or the family argument next door. People called her Babs, and the name mattered. It made her sound familiar, almost domestic, not distant like a grand film star, but close enough to be recognised in a bus queue or defended by someone's auntie over tea. She was tiny, blonde, quick with a laugh, and unmistakably East End. Even when the material was broad, cheeky, or a little past its best, she brought a kind of life to it that felt hard to fake. For older viewers, Barbara sits inside two great rooms of British memory. The first is the cinema of the 1960s and 1970s, where the carry-on films offered innuendo, farce, seaside postcard humour, and a national talent for pretending not to be rude while being extremely rude indeed. The second is the living room, where EastEnders arrived not as glamour, but as routine. Dinner done, kettle on, Peggy Mitchell, about to cause trouble in the Queen Vic. That range is what made Barbara unusual. She could be a burst of comic mischief, then years later become a woman of command, wounded pride, and fierce family loyalty. The public did not just watch her grow older, they grew older with her. And perhaps that is why her final illness touched people so deeply. Barbara had become part of how Britain remembered itself. The jokes it told, the households it visited, the accents it once tried to polish away. But behind the brightness was a more difficult question. Did the public love Barbara Windsor herself, or the memories they had placed upon her? Before she was Barbara Windsor, she was Barbara Ann Deeks, a girl from Shoreditch in East London, born in 1937 into a working-class home, where glamour was not exactly waiting by the front door. The East End gave her something more useful than polish. It gave her pace, nerve, and that instinctive understanding of people who have to talk quickly because life will not pause for them. Her childhood was not the soft-focus sort later used in celebrity profiles. Britain was changing, but class still had a firm grip, and an accent could open a door or close it before you reached the handle. Barbara's mother sent her for elocution lessons and training at the Ida Foster Theatre School, which sounds grand enough until you remember that most dreams still had to be paid for. Usually by someone counting every shilling, she made her stage debut at 13. By 15, in 1952, she was in the West End chorus of Love from Judy. She was not yet the star, but she was already learning the trade where it mattered. In rehearsal rooms, dressing rooms, and theatres where nobody cared how tired you were once the curtain went up. Then came 1953. Queen Elizabeth II was crowned, Britain put on its best hat, and Barbara Deeks chose the stage name Windsor. It was a wonderful piece of show business cheek. A girl from Shoreditch taking a royal name was either ambition, mischief, or a very English way of refusing to know one's place. That name did not make her famous overnight. Names rarely do, but it gave her a frame large enough for the life she seemed determined to build. The question was whether Britain would see the actress inside the bright young performer, or simply decide what it wanted her to be. The answer would arrive sooner than she expected, and not entirely in the shape she deserved. Long before Carry On fixed her in the national imagination, Barbara Windsor was proving herself in places where charm alone would not have survived the first rehearsal. Joan Littlewood's theatre workshop at Stratford East was not a finishing school for pretty faces. It was rough, inventive, political, loud, and full of performers who had to sound as if they had actually lived the lives they were playing. That suited Barbara. She was not built for icy distance. She had warmth, speed, and a face that could turn from mischief to hurt before an audience had quite prepared itself. In 1959, Things Ain't What They Used gave her a place in the East End musical world that felt close to the streets she knew. It was theatre with dirt under its fingernails, and Barbara understood that very well. Then came Sparrows Can't Sing in 1963, Joan Littlewood's only feature film, adapted from the theatre workshop stage world. Barbara played Maggie, a young woman living by instinct, desire, and the ordinary confusions of working-class life. It was not the polished drawing room Britain of old cinema. It was louder, messier, and more alive. Barbara did not need to pretend to belong there. She did belong there. The performance earned serious attention, including a BAFTA nomination, and for a brief moment it seemed possible that Barbara Windsor might become known chiefly as a sharp, natural screen actress. Not a joke, not a postcard, not a blonde punctuation mark at the end of someone else's line. But careers do not always reward the thing an actor does best. Sometimes they reward the thing the public notices fastest. Barbara had comic timing, beauty, nerve, and a laugh that could cut through a room. The industry saw all of that, and being the industry, immediately tried to package it. In 1964, Carry On Spying came calling. Daphne Honeybutt opened the door to national fame. It also began the long misunderstanding. Carry On did not arrive quietly in Barbara Windsor's life. In 1964, Carry On Spying introduced her as Daphne Honeybutt, a name so shamelessly silly that only British comedy could say it with a straight face. The series already had its own rhythm. Broad faces, double meanings, collapsing authority, and a national habit of laughing at things everyone pretended not to understand. Barbara fitted it brilliantly. She had timing, energy, and the rare gift of making a ridiculous scene feel as if it had just happened naturally in front of you. She was not merely decoration. Though the films often tried to use her that way, she could land a look, bend a line, and turn embarrassment into a public event. In a carry-on world full of winks, hers somehow seemed the quickest. Then came Carry On Camping in 1969, and the famous bikini scene that followed her for the rest of her career. It made audiences roar, newspapers smile, and Barbara Windsor instantly recognizable to people who had never seen her serious work. It was cheeky, dated, and very much of its time. In other words, Britain adored it, then later pretended to be more sophisticated than it had been. But fame has a habit of arriving with a bill. Between 1964 and 1974, Barbara appeared in 9 carry-on films. They gave her national affection, but also narrowed the public's imagination. The actress from Theatre Workshop, the BAFTA-nominated performer from Sparrows Can't Sing, became fixed in many minds as the bright blonde carry-on girl. That was the misunderstanding. Audiences loved her, but sometimes they loved the easiest version of her. The industry, never one to miss a convenient label, helped keep it that way. For Barbara, the laughter was real. So was the trap, and for years afterwards, she would have to prove that the woman behind the joke had always been much more interesting than the joke itself. By the early 1990s, some viewers thought they knew exactly where Barbara Windsor belonged. In repeats, retrospectives, and fond conversations about the Britain of seaside postcards and saucy cinema posters. Then, in 1994, EastEnders gave her a door back into the present. Not a glamorous door, naturally. This was Albert Square. Even the doors looked as if they had heard bad news. Barbara arrived as Peggy Mitchell, and something changed. Peggy was not a carry-on fantasy. She was a mother, a fighter, a landlady, and a woman who could turn family loyalty into a weapon before breakfast. Around her stood Phil and Grant Mitchell, two sons who could fill any room with trouble. Yet somehow, Peggy often seemed the most dangerous person in it. The Queen Vic became her kingdom. "Get out of my pub" was more than a catchphrase. It was ownership, pride, fear, class, and theatre packed into 5 words. Barbara delivered it with such authority that millions accepted Peggy as real, which is about the highest compliment British television can offer, short of giving someone a Christmas special. This was not just a comeback, it was a correction. The public had known Barbara could be funny. EastEnders reminded them she could be commanding, wounded, cruel, loving, and painfully human. Peggy's storylines, including her battles with breast cancer and the mess of the Mitchell family, gave Barbara material with weight. She did not waste it. There were interruptions. She stepped back at points for health reasons, returned, and remained part of EastEnders mythology long after her regular appearances ended. In 2010, Peggy left as a main presence. In 2016, she returned for her final scenes, as Peggy faced cancer again and chose her own ending. By then, Barbara's own life had begun to echo darker notes of farewell. But before that final chapter, she had done something rare. She had escaped the image that made her famous, and made Britain look at her again. There is a particular cruelty in Alzheimer's disease when it comes for a performer. An actor spends a life learning lines, reading rooms, remembering cues and trusting the private machinery of memory. For Barbara Windsor, whose face and voice had lived for decades inside Britain's own memory, the illness arrived with almost unbearable irony. Her husband, Scott Mitchell, later said he had first noticed worrying changes years before the public knew. Around 2009, Barbara began struggling with lines, something that had once been part of her professional muscle. At first, it could be explained away. Tiredness, age, pressure, the ordinary slips everyone forgives until they become too frequent to ignore. In 2014, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. For several years, the diagnosis remained private. That discretion mattered. It was not secrecy for drama, nor a celebrity mystery waiting to be revealed. It was a family trying to protect a woman who had already given the public more access than most people ever could. In 2018, Scott made the illness public, and the country responded not with curiosity alone, but with recognition. Many families knew that slow, painful rearrangement of daily life, Barbara's final years, were not a fall from grace. They were another kind of public service, though quieter and far more costly. By allowing her story to be known, she helped bring dementia out of whispered corners and into ordinary conversation. In 2019, her name became linked with campaigns for dementia research and care, reminding Britain that memory loss was not a private embarrassment. It was a national human problem. The hardest thought remains simple. Millions could still hear Peggy Mitchell. They could still remember Carry On, the laugh, the timing, the spark. But Barbara herself was losing the pathways back to those moments. A nation remembered her clearly, while she was slowly being taken from herself. Barbara Windsor's legacy is easy to reduce, which is exactly why it should not be reduced. She was the carry-on girl, yes. She was Peggy Mitchell, certainly. She was Babs, the tiny woman with the great big presence. The laugh, the blonde hair, and the voice that could slice through a crowded room. But she was also more than the souvenirs Britain kept of her. She was a working-class London girl who understood performance as a form of survival. She was a stage actress shaped by Joan Littlewood's world, where truth mattered more than polish. She was a comic performer who made broad material feel alive. She was a television matriarch who found, late in her career, the role that allowed the public to see her strength rather than merely her sparkle. In 2016, she was made a Dame for services to entertainment and charity. That same year, Peggy Mitchell made her final farewell in EastEnders. It was a strangely fitting crossing of fact and fiction, the nation honouring Barbara, while her most famous character stepped into television history for good. What remains now is not a perfect life, because perfect lives rarely make interesting stories, and in Britain, we tend to distrust them anyway. What remains is a career of reinvention, a woman who was underestimated, then adored, then boxed in, then rediscovered. A performer who belonged to cinemas, stages, pubs, living rooms, Christmas repeats, and family arguments about whether Peggy had gone too far this time. Alzheimer's took much from Barbara Windsor. It did not take what she had already given away, that was safely lodged elsewhere. In viewers who still remember the line, the laugh, the look, the sheer nerve of her. If you remember a Barbara Windsor moment, perhaps leave it below. Sometimes the audience becomes the archive. And for Barbara, that archive is full of life,